What's up, everybody? Hive Mind back with another Deck Tech with our local RCQ winner, Bobby Benson. Bobby, tell us what you won with.
So we sleeved up something a little bit old school, a little bit new school.
Yeah, I see some old border cards here, but I also see some old cards that haven't seen some modern play in a while.
For sure. So I won the RCQ, thankfully, with Jund's Saga. I was pretty happy with my matchups. I think the biggest thing that I loved about the deck was how heavy we were on spot removal. Knowing that Boros was potentially a big threat in the room, wanted to make sure that we had game against most creature strategies.
Yeah, you have 8 spot removal spells plus Ren and 6 picking off X1s. I think that's pretty strong right now. I have to ask you, because it's one of my favorite cards, how did Bob feel?
So Bob felt amazing.
For all the youngins, Bob, I mean Dark Confidant. Bob Maher, the card who designed it.
It's crazy that we have to even think about that at this point, right? Wild to think that we have to explain who Bob Maher was in 2024.
Yep.
But no, for sure. So Bob felt great. Biggest thing that I loved about the deck was my Murktide matchup in addition to my Boros matchup. And Bob really was the linchpin of that. Knowing that a lot of people are playing fair blue decks in the room, Bob was a great way to gain incremental card advantage against decks that are flush with counter magic. So it forced them to have to take actions to the board, which played right into what Jund wants to do.
Yes, because you have cards like the Molten Collapse and even cards like Now Spellbound, which are good against Murktide decks in general.
Correct.
So did you feel like there was any card that wasn't pulling its weight? I see these Ragavans, and I think of the current metagame with a lot of like X1 creatures or 1/1 mythics with first strike and stuff like that. Was there any matchup where you felt Ragavan wasn't pulling his weight?
Believe it or not, Ragavan wasn't actually the weakest link that I felt in the deck. Ragavan, of course, against Boros and decks that are traditionally low to the ground, if I happen to see that Elves player in the top 8, Ryan, I think it would have been a little bit worse off.
Okay.
The card that felt the worst for me, which was surprising, was Bowmaster.
I was gonna say that like I've also been playing a little bit with other decks right now, and I've been playing some Blue-Black Murktide, and Bowmaster felt like the weakest card in that deck overall. So tell me what Bowmaster wasn't doing for you.
So a lot of people look at Bowmaster and they think it's a very aggressive ping effect against boards that are going low to the ground and going wide. And my experience in Legacy versus my experience in Modern has been significantly different with this card. Bowmaster, more often than not, turned into 2 1/1 chump blockers and potentially picking off a small creature.
Sure.
Whereas in Legacy, obviously, you're generating multiple ping effects, clearing boards.
One format is Brainstorm, the other one doesn't. But
100%.
Yes, I'll commiserate with you on that one.
For sure, for sure.
So, and then for our targets that we can get with our Jund Saga, we have 3. We have the Haywire Might, the Shadow Spear, and the Now Spellbomb in the main deck. Were there any other options you thought about adding to the main?
So people have seen lists with Lava Spur Boots. Lava Spur Boots was definitely on the radar. It's a nice card that helps generate a little bit more aggression out of your Saga tokens, especially since more often than not, the line is, okay, I'm going to search my Lava Spur Boots, equip them to my newly basically created token, and try to get in for combat damage.
Yeah.
I think the card could see potential play and maybe trim one of the Bowmasters.
That's fair.
That being said, I was pretty happy overall with my Saga targets, especially since out of the board we had an additional Spell Bomb, maybe a Grafdigger's Cage, or some Needles as well.
The needles I really love. There's fun gotcha moments, especially if your opponent doesn't crack their fetch land, and they're like behind a little bit. But let's go over to your sideboard now and talk about a little bit about that. We have our targets. We have the Grafdigger's Cage, the extra Nile, and the extra Haywire Might. We got Terminate. Not enough removal in the main deck, trying to squeeze a little bit more in, or is that targeting something specific?
So very interesting that you bring that up. So Jund historically has always been a very big Edict deck. It's always been Liliana of the Veil. If not, we're playing cards like Assassin's Trophy.
And I see none of these cards in the main.
Correct.
Okay.
So one key weakness of the deck main board is that you're very soft to resolve large creatures. And in being soft to resolve large creatures, I wanted to cushion that post board, especially since we're seeing a lot of Murktide return to the metagame.
Yes.
A card like Terminate really helped fill that niche.
Yeah, hands down 2 mana, just deal with anything. I think that's pretty good. We got, obviously, some of our Tron hate here.
Of course.
And then we have more Graveyard hate in the form of Surgical Extraction. What are decks you want to bring that in against?
So Surgical I find to be one of the most overboarded cards in all of Modern history. I think what I'm looking to attack with the Surgical Extraction With Jund, it's a little bit different. You can go after decks like Ruby Storm because you're able to Thoughtseize and pick off more artifacts or pick off different spells.
Sure.
What I'm really using that Surgical Extraction exclusively for, though, is Goryo's Vengeance.
Big payoff decks. Decks that are trying to put fatties in the yard.
100%.
Living end type stuff like that. Things
Correct.
that are trying to abuse what's going on in the meta.
For sure. And normally single
Understandable.
target graveyard pieces. So cards like Atraxa, being able to snipe 4 Atraxa out of a Goryo's deck
Sure.
and leave them on 2 threats to 3 threats. Very important.
That makes sense. Your Inquisitions is more discard, I would assume, against a lot of the counterspell decks that are counter heavy. Bring yourself up to 6 discard spells. That's pretty good. And then I see Plague Engineer.
So Plague Engineer.
Can you just tell me what the most common creature type you named at the RCQ
I'll give
was?
you one guess. What do you think we're naming?
I would think we're naming cats.
Oh, 100% we're naming cat.
We're naming cats. We're flipping a Johnny's the second they come in.
So the philosophy behind building the deck this way, Plague Engineer was great against Boros in the sense that you're able to wipe the board, but you're also able to keep the board wiped. The one, I guess, frustrating point that makes Boros such a strong deck in the format is Boros is great at rebuilding. You wipe the board with a Pyroclasm, you wipe the board with a Wrath Disguise, you wipe the board with pretty much any clear Supreme Verdict, and the next turn they're right back with 6
Very strong, very powerful deck that just full of 2-for-1s for yourself.
Incredibly resilient.
Yeah.
What Plague Engineer does is Plague Engineer takes the tokens out of the question and allows you to focus your spot removal like Lightning Bolt and Fatal Push and Molten Collapse on the cards that matter. Looking at a Johnny, looking at Guide of Souls, looking at key players in the matchup that really help swing board states. And
it also gives them a target for them to, like, there's so many other targets for them to try and hit with their removal. Now they have something else that's detrimental for them to deal with.
Correct.
So,
and more often than not, those decks, if they are hitting Plague Engineer, they're dying to the Tarmogoyf. We're actually one of the few decks that can out-aggro Boros in the sense that we're presenting clocks that are very quick clocks in Nethergoyf and Tarmogoyf because more often than not, they're 5/6s or 6/7s in this deck.
Yeah.
And they're forced to play removal on their early turns, which turns 1 through 3 are the most important turns for the Boros deck. If they can't get out early, they're the worst aggro deck in the format.
Yeah. Are there any changes you're looking to make moving forward, or is this something you would sleeve up again?
So a lot of players look at this list, and the first thing that they'll say, especially if you're a historical Jund player, is where's the Tron hate? Tron right now is a fantastic deck in the metagame. We're looking at Ugin's Labyrinth, really starting to propel these decks towards the forefront of the format. I definitely think that I'd like to fit either Break the Ice into this deck or Fulminator Mage. I've seen some Jund lists start to sleeve up Gigantha. If you are playing Gigantha, you can't play either of those cards.
Yes.
That being said, I think if this list continues to stay Gigantha list, I would probably trim.
Speaking of which, is there a Gigantha here?
No Gigantha in this list at all.
Okay.
So believe it or not, it was off a Gigantha framework. I got me thinking about Bob saying like, okay, well, if the majority of my list is fairly low CMC, why not take advantage of the card advantage? A lot of decks are playing the One Ring as a way to kind of generate card advantage within the format. I think Bob is great.
Looking at your deck, your CMC is probably a 1.45, something like that.
Around that, yep.
Yeah.
So I was very happy with the way that the list played. I think philosophically, you want to keep the deck low on the curve. This is any deck in Modern right now. You want to stay low on the curve. You want to be linear. You want to be aggressive, and you want to be proactive. I played the Murktide deck for a while. I was very happy with the way that it felt. That being said, I think this was the better meta call, knowing that Boros is returning to the metagame.
Well, we at the Hive Mind love to see some of these old decks get revitalized, and congratulations on your RCQ win.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me.
We appreciate having you out. Don't forget to like and subscribe, sign up for the OCHO if you're local, and we'll see you in the next one.
Sounds good. See you guys soon.